Every person out there knows exactly what they want.
I felt like your career path is diverse, and I feel like you took like every aspect of your career path to like its culmination of where you're at right now.
The majority of my career, the majority of the time, or at least the way that I paid the bills, is by being a personal trainer.
I did do a snowball stand for like 2 days.
Are they willing to make the sacrifice to be able to make those things happen?
I remember reading a book called like What Would the Rockefellers Do? All right, welcome to another episode of the Pinpoint Investor Podcast with Faz Morsi. Excited for my next guest, Adam Shuty. Adam and I have talked a couple times before. Honestly, I don't really know what Adam does. He seems like he's all over the place, kind of like what intrigues me about him. And he's definitely an interesting guy. So yeah, Adam, appreciate you being on, man.
Hey, thanks, Faisal. I appreciate it. And you know, I don't take that all over the place comment personally. I know that from viewing me from the outside, friends and family over the years have said like, dude, what are you doing? I've looked this up, and I actually, I had a little conversation with AI this morning, and there's a difference between being a generalist and being a polymath. And I'm not saying that, I mean, maybe that is what would be a better way to describe me, is that I've gone very deep into some specific areas of life. And now I feel that due to the experience that I've gathered over the past, you know, my career goes back to early 2000s, so 25 years, you know, I feel like now's the time, more into the second half of my life. I'll be 48 this year. I'd like to be able to give back. And so the majority of my career, the majority of the time, or at least the way that I paid the bills, is by being a personal trainer. So I've been in front of people tens of thousands of hours, talking to them about their hopes, their dreams, their desires. And, you know, ultimately it's about looking better in the mirror, you know, but at the end of the day, it's making better choices, creating great habits. And I think because I was willing to make certain choices at certain points in time in my life, I've been able to do some wild things, everything from graduate Virginia Tech with a systems engineering degree, and then boom, moved to New York City and started doing stand-up comedy. You know, the last show that I did was in 2019, and it was a standing room only, sold out audience at a solo comedy festival at the People's Improv Theater, where I'm actually broadcasting from right now, because I've got deep roots.
Easily the best background that I've had of all my guests. So it's pretty cool.
Well, look, again, this is like, the thing is like, you know, I'm the sample size of one. I only know my life. You know what I mean? Like, and I think when I tell people, you know, even my wife, who, God bless her, I found a woman that could put up with me. You know, she basically, every now and again, if I want to mess with her, I'll tell her something else. Like, yeah, you know, there was that summer that I worked at the ice cream stand. And she's like, you worked at an ice cream stand? I'm like, yeah, of course I worked at an ice cream stand, you know, and whether it's true or not, like at this point, I can just make anything up, because it's like, she believes it. And it's true. I did work at an ice cream stand. I did work for a summer, but among other things, you know? So I don't know. What was the weirdest job you ever, I mean, how many jobs do you think you've had in your life, if you had to think about it?
Well, like 20, 30, I've gotten fired from a majority of them. Yeah, I'm like at this point I'm pretty unemployable. Yeah, yeah, I would say, yeah. I did do a snowball stand for like 2 days.
A snowball stand,
But what wasn't? Yeah,
a snow so very fast paced and very seasonal, I suppose. Yeah, nice. Changes on a dime. So yeah, so you get it, man. It's like there's if there was just an easy, clear path in life, or, you know, what would be the point, I think, right? It's just like, it would be, everything would be too easy. There'd be no game. The game is figuring it out. And I put a lot of thought into this. I don't think anybody, every person out there knows exactly what they want, and they've already given it a lot of thought. And if they haven't, then, you know, God help that person. I don't know why, but, you know, you'd sit down with anybody, any human being is going to say, man, I just wish I had, you know, a boat, you know, or I wish I had more time off, or whatever it is. They'd say, I want to do these things. And then the question is, are they willing to make the sacrifice to be able to make those things happen? And I think that potentially people like myself, like yourself, by putting things out there, putting good work out there, might be a catalyst for change for people that are just looking for that spark. And I'm one of those people. I've invested tens, if not hundreds of thousands of dollars in my own personal development over the years. And so I don't just claim to have just like arrived on the scene and just started, kicking ass and taking names. It was like certain people intervened at different points in time in my life and they had a big impact. And I took what I could and then moved on to the next thing. I can give credit to, when I came up with the kind of crazy idea to move to New York after I got my degree, a couple things that occurred. One, a dear girlfriend that I had in college said, I don't see why you're in engineering. You seem more like an actor. And that it never occurred to me. But when she said that, I was like, that'd be awesome. I'd love to try that. I'd love to even just, make that a possibility, and then September 11th occurred. And, that was super intense. I was a senior in college when September 11th occurred. And, it just really hit home that when kids, young people, even young adults, stop going for their dreams, and that means moving to a big city to pursue their dream, whatever that may be, then we definitely have lost something in our society. And, it's like the terrorists have won. And so those kind of things were, catalyzing me to move. I made the move. It was a big jump. It wasn't easy. My parents, friends, and family were basically like, you have an engineering degree. Like, you're supposed to get a really good job and like go make the money and we don't have to worry about you ever again, but instead I'm like driving a pedal taxi, in Times Square, hustling up, trying to make my rent so that I can go out and like hand out flyers for a comedy club. So, I can keep going. I don't mean to.
No, and it's funny, right? Like I said, when I said you were all over the place, it wasn't an insult. It was like I felt like your career path is diverse, and I feel like you took like every aspect of your career path to like it's a culmination of where you're at right now. So like, give me an idea, like based on like that experience, like where you're at now, and like how have you used that experience to like build the business that you have now?
Great question. So the pandemic, I think that really the origins of where we are now is the pandemic, because everything was going along swimmingly. I had built a boutique personal training studio in Manhattan on 57th Street between Park and Lexington, one of the nicest blocks in the city. And, I started that in 2009. Again, the financial crisis was a catalyst for the genesis of the studio. I opened the studio in 2009 and it was just blood, sweat, and tears for like, I don't know, 4 or 5 years before we finally started making money and like, was probably a couple months behind on rent and finally be able to dig out of that, So it was just, they talk about grit. I don't even know. It's like beyond grit. This was like between a rock and a hard place. And it's like when you find yourself in a position where you can't make any other decision other than put one foot in front of the other. I think ultimately it's not pleasant or comfortable, but this is where the diamonds are made, in that pressure. And so fast forward 2020, pandemic occurs. It becomes illegal to meet face to face, in a personal training fitness capacity. And what I realized was, okay, I need to go back to the drawing board and create something that's virtual, or create something that's online, or create something that allows me to connect with not, 1 or 2 or 5 or 10 or even a couple hundred people through my staff at a time, but to be able to connect with thousands of people at a time. And that we were not set up to pivot to that in 2020, meaning we had a brick and mortar business with a handshake and a look in the eye and thanks for coming. See you next time. Do you have anybody else that would like to come in and get in shape and go to this, come to this cool fitness studio on 57th Street? And we tried to build apps. We shot 300 exercise videos in the summer of 2020. And it just wasn't the right thing for that time and for our population, because everybody else had done that or was doing it or trying to do it, because it wasn't like a unique idea at that point. If you had started shooting videos in 2019 or 2018, you were trying to build an online business in 2018, you were probably far enough ahead of the curve to be ready for that, that tsunami when it came and wiped everything out and made everybody go online. But with a brick and mortar location and the rent that we paid there in the city, you had to keep people coming through the door. You couldn't be wasting your time with online stuff, so to speak. Hindsight 2020, it would have been a very good investment. So pandemic basically leveled that business. People weren't meeting face to face. I had to figure out a way to make money. And I had some buddies that were in medical device. They always did very well. They always talked a lot of trash. Like they really were like just badass and like ran through the fire every day. And, they had all the grit and they had all the determination. And I'll tell you this, boy, do they ever. I don't know if you know anybody in medical device, especially in spine surgery. Goodness gracious. These guys get raked over the coals every day. It is a rough, rough job. And I did that for 2 years. And I really learned what I was made of with regards to like, how much are you really willing to work for something? Because this was somebody else's dream, right? Spine surgery was not my business. I networked my way in. I was able to, pivot from running a fitness studio. We worked with a lot of people that were pre-op and post-op spine surgery patients. And, so we were, I was aware of all of the, articulations of the spine and the way in which the forces within the vertebrae react, and that, where the exiting nerves are, and essentially the biology of the spinal cord and the functioning of the spinal column. And so I was able to get into this kind of elite level medical sales job. And, I just wouldn't wish that on my worst enemy, at least for a father of two. And I had 2 boys. I still have 2 boys, but they were of the age of, let's see, it was like 2-3 years ago, 3 and 5, and they're 6 and 8. And, I know you have young kids, right? You wouldn't want to give up behind with them. Yeah. Amazing. Yeah. And so like, I had to give up all my time with my kids. Like literally I would be the guy that just had to run off to the operating room, and I would pay the bills and go to the operating room. And that's just not in alignment. And that actually kind of makes some sense for what I'm doing now. It's about being in alignment with this person that you are, and that you've on some level always been. We change throughout the phases and the seasons of our life, but at some point there's a person that we've more or less been true to the entire way through. And, maybe that's even, if you want to get into like some psychological stuff, it's like, maybe that's you as a child, before the responsibilities of the world got heaped on top of you. But ultimately there's this part of you that, is either being nurtured or ignored. And, I tried to silence that voice for 2 years doing spine surgery. And ultimately it kind of came roaring back and was like, this is not who you are. This is not what you do. You got to figure it out. So I went and ended up, getting a job working for a physical therapy clinic, which was a little bit more in alignment, kind of steers the ship back into the fitness, kind of the preoperative care world, as opposed to the, post-op where the person is really just, they've just had surgery. There's not much else you can do for them at that point. And I'm working for this physical therapy clinic, and I'm saying to myself, I'm helping people live longer. If I'm helping people live longer, what am I missing? What's missing from that equation? And kind of I can't say serendipitously. That's not the right word. I mean, but around this time, my father passed away. And I don't know if you've lost a parent, but it's kind of a big deal. I would imagine for everybody that's lost a parent out there, my heart goes out to them. And I had a unique relationship with my father, in that there were it was tumultuous, but ultimately we had gotten to a good place. And he was a financial planner for the second half of his career. And his passing made me think, I'm helping people live as long as possible, but what is really the one thing, if you're healthy and you've, looked at your Whoop data every day and you've gotten your sleep and you've, eaten all of the, the ground flaxseed and wheat germ and all the, healthy things you can do. And you've done the 1,000 things that you need to do to be healthy. What's the one thing, and I'll ask you this, what's the one thing you're going to worry about when you're in retirement years, if you're healthy?
Probably just your family.
Okay, sure. Of course. Yes. Absolutely. Absolutely. Your immediate, like the bodies of the people. Let's just say everybody's happy and healthy. Everybody's happy and healthy. What's the number one thing? And it's like you could look this up. It's a thing that's out there.
Yeah. I mean, my guess is money,
Yeah, exactly. It's finance. And so, I grew up in this household. My father was a financial planner. I always looked at fitness as an investment. I literally had people, I'm asking them to pay $1,000, $1,200 a month to work out. You can put on a pair of running shoes and go get a jump rope, for $35 and you're like working out. You can be in great shape and be penniless, So it's not about, it's not about it being cost effective, right? Or it's not about, you're going to spend more money to get something that you value, right? And that would be the right type of training, the knowledge that comes with somebody that's been doing it for a long time, right? It's an investment to learn how to have an elite level of fitness, not just go and figure it out and maybe hurt yourself, run around the park. And so I looked at it as, all right, how can I partner with someone who is in financial planning? Obviously not my dad, as he was gone. And he was also a pain in the butt. So he wouldn't have been the right partner. But I called up a buddy of mine who's in financial planning and I said, his name's Kevin. I said, Kevin, I got this great idea. I want to start a business where I'm going to help people live as long as possible. And then you're going to do the planning for them so that they have money to live the lifestyle that they want to lead, for the rest of their lives. And, plan it out, like, let's game it out. So if they're going to live, if they're healthy, 65 is not, that's retirement. 75, that's not going to be when they pass away. They're going to be, 10 or 15 or 20 years past the life expectancy, average life expectancy. And that's a very different planning scenario than it would be if you, just didn't take care of yourself and you're like, I don't know, I'm going to drop dead one of these days, and you just keep smoking and, drinking or whatever. And so he said, Adam, it's a great idea. I love how you think. I know where you're going with it. Unfortunately, you're not able to participate in financial planning or any type of conversations unless you're a licensed financial professional. And I thought, okay, well, that's interesting. Maybe I need to go back to the drawing board. He said, actually, no, you should talk to the partners at my firm and see where it goes. So 2.5 years ago, I went and got licensed in life, health, and disability insurance, which is a licensed financial professional, for all intents and purposes. If you want to go further with it, you then go and get your Series 7 and 66 or 65 or whatever the ones that are required for your state to be able to do securities. But where I've arrived at is that that's not something that I want to do. I'm not trying to be somebody's financial planner. I want to be able to help people check all the boxes from a strategic standpoint, right? And one thing I like to say is I eliminate the cognitive overhead required to participate in reality. Meaning all the stuff you have to think about, from whether it's a, insurance or protection standpoint, your investments, the things that you do, how you exercise, how you sleep, all the things that you could just open up your phone and go into Instagram and just start scrolling and scrolling, or go on ChatGPT and have it give you a whole, recipe for what you need to do for your life. And if you're so inclined to do that, great. But ultimately, what I'm saying with regards to the cognitive overhead, it's not about having choices, it's about having too many choices. So what I want to do is partner with people and help them say, okay, look, it's like, yes, you need to do these 5 things, maybe, but what's the one thing that's going to make the biggest change? And that could be in the physical realm. And I kind of have these 4 pillars that I operate from. One is alignment, creating alignment. I call it the alignment operating system. Number 2 is physical vitality. So all of the things, sleep, diet, exercise, doctor's checkups, all the testing you can do, cardiac scans, et cetera, in the physical area. Next is kind of psychological, social, spiritual. And we haven't really touched on that, but that's really what's kind of seen me through. That's been kind of a through line that's also given me the confidence to do a lot of these things, is just having a really strong connection to myself and to my community. And then beyond that, the 4th pillar is the financial. And within the financial realm, I just have, from working with a financial planning firm for the past 2.5 years, and ongoing, I have a very specific checklist that it's basically like, do you have this? Have you done this? Is this interesting to you? And it's very simple. It's not a sales thing. It's just basically like, these are the things that are out there. If you've heard of this, have you heard of this? Like, have you heard of the Rockefeller waterfall method? Is that something that you're familiar with?
Yeah, I have. I remember reading a book called like "What Would the Rockefellers Do," and that was
Fantastic! Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, here we are, on a podcast that talks about investing and making good investments. So I would hope that you had, but you'd be surprised. I'm sure you wouldn't be surprised how few people have heard about just a simple technique like that.
Or have me frame it just for people that don't know.
The Rockefeller waterfall method. So, and I'm paraphrasing here, but essentially the Rockefellers, it's argued, have more wealth now than they did 100 years ago. And compared to another family of generational wealth like the Vanderbilts are a shadow of who they once were. And supposedly this technique that they employed allowed them to multiply their wealth generationally and essentially create a family brand that we are wealthy, we are always wealthy and getting wealthier. And if you want to participate in the luxuries or benefits of being in this family, then you're going to keep your act together, behave a certain way, and make certain decisions. And kind of the foundation of this strategy is a dividend paying whole life insurance that essentially is taken out on the children when they're born. And you can take a life insurance policy out in most states on anyone after they're 2 weeks old. They have a birth certificate and a social security number. And that's when life insurance is, super cheap, or at least on a discount, because they're a baby. And, it only gets more expensive the older we get. So you take out this policy on the child, you get a lot of bang for your buck from the policy, but it's not about them. It's not necessarily about them passing away. It's about overfunding the policy, creating a large sum of cash value that they will then have as essentially a bank account for them to use for the rest of their life. And then when they pass away, due to the kind of the multiplicative effects of the death benefit, that child who is now passed away as an old person would have had the benefit of, using the funds for various things throughout their life, different investments, et cetera. If they had taken out large loans, the loans would be covered by the death benefit. And assuming they managed their life effectively, the death benefit would then not only pay back the loans, but would, be some quantity multiplying greater, than what they had used. Right? Is that accurate? Do you feel that's a good explanation?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think they even talked about like instead of it being like in the individual's hands, it was like they basically like group their money together, and so that way there's the power in the the cumulative basically.
Of course, yeah. And these things would pass, through trusts. It wouldn't necessarily even be something that the individual necessarily owns. And the trust could take out the policy and pay for the policies. And again, it's basically self-funding. And again, that's why it's a waterfall, is that the idea is it's, from generation to generation falling, and gathering momentum, or, you could call it even like the snowball technique, because it's rolling and it's gathering, volume and gathering, wealth during the lifetime. Individual has the benefit of it while they're alive. They pass away, and then the subsequent generation has even more benefit, or at least starts off at a net positive from a financial standpoint. So it's not something, and this is very personal to me, because it's actually not something that my father had set up. And so this is where somebody who was and I'm not trashing financial planners. I think they're essential when it comes to management of your securities. But as far as the decisions that are made with where you invest, that's one branch. And as you know, there are just so many different silos within finance. Somebody that's really into investing may not be super well versed on the insurance side of things. And so I'm kind of putting my flag in the ground and saying, assuming you've got all these other things in alignment that we have discussed in my process, from creating an alignment operating system, getting your physical form really tuned up, having great psychological, social, spiritual connections to the world, that final piece, that financial piece is essentially something that if you want to create the generational wealth and you want to have that kind of impact, these are policies that we took out on my sons. And it's not like that makes all the problems go away, but I'll tell you what is that saying? It's like, having money makes being poor a lot easier, or something like that. I don't know what it is. I'm kind of forgetting what the statement is, but you know what I'm saying? It's like, if you had to choose between being rich and poor, being rich would be a heck of a lot better than being poor. And, with it comes longer lifespan. With it comes so many other things that are of value. And obviously it's also the arbitration of the stewardship of wealth generationally. It's not something that, if the kid doesn't show that some promise, they're not going to they don't have to get access to it. It's the adults are in charge, until they're not. So, I don't know. Do you run into, is this something that you've thought of or considered, or that you've, put into place with your family, or?
So I mean, I've thought of it. We have a trust currently for like me and my wife, but we don't really have like a whole life policy for our kids or anything like that. So it's definitely something intriguing. I've gone back and forth about like the benefits of it and like longevity, but I kind of feel like people overhype the term legacy and like building wealth for like our kids, when in all reality, like, do like your great grandfather, like what he did with his life, or what I mean? Like, ask like your grandfather. Like, most people don't really remember you. And I can tell you, even my grandfather, like, I have very limited memories of him. And so, if he were had he created something like that for me, like, I'm sure I would have been grateful, but like, I really think like there's as much weight as like people tend to like, talk about nowadays.
Oh, that's interesting. Sure. And I totally get it. Yeah, this isn't necessarily to preserve my name or anything in that regard. I simply want I want my line, the people that I have, my progeny. I really want them to just have the opportunity to screw it up. Do you know what I'm saying? Like, I'd at least, I know that it's very, I've been lucky to get to where I am, and had the broad variety of experiences that I've had. But I also know that that there's a tremendous amount of luck that kept me from potentially, hitting rock bottom. And also my family did create have a safety net for me. I'm not some trust fund kid that was just able to just like do whatever I wanted willy nilly. No, like I did everything on my own. I did everything from dollars that I had to scrape together and do myself. Um, However, I always knew, and this was kind of what was communicated by my parents, there's always a place for, there's always a place, a home for you to come back to. If you get into trouble, and I will say there were a couple times where, right out of college, whether it was like some credit card debt, that they helped me out with, and then maybe, of course, getting my business started, they did give me for the rent that I needed to get the lease, which was like a couple months rent. But I mean, ultimately, like I painted the walls by myself. I'm how many thousand trips to Home Depot did I make in Midtown Manhattan? Cutting plastic bags through my hands, carrying, lumber or whatever back to the studio to paint and pound and scrape and put it together and make it into something that over the course of 10 years eventually became something that was extremely beautiful. And the other thing is like, these policies, what they're great as a buffer asset, right? So it's not something that you're trying to do where this is your one sole method. Like this isn't like you're taking all your chips and pushing them into this one thing. This is like a small percentage of your net worth devoted to this one strategy. Of course, you should be in the market. Of course, you could have a 529 plan, but the 529 plan also rides the ebb and flow of the market. Whereas, a properly structured whole life policy is going to give you guaranteed returns, because we're talking about a mutual insurance company, not a stock company. So their responsibility, the mutual company's responsibility, is to the policyholders to pay those dividends, make sure that there's the growth there, which, is somewhere hovers around 5%. There are some index participation features that you can put in most states, where you'll get a ceiling, a basement of a certain percentage and a ceiling of a certain percentage that'll mirror the S&P 500, but it doesn't actually give you any risk because it's never going to lose. It's never going to go, the S&P could go down 20% and you wouldn't lose any money. You at least make whatever that basement level percentage is. And so I think a lot of these things get set up incorrectly. And so my point is, I said buffer asset. My point is that, the 529 could fluctuate, but this is always going to go up. So this can also be, it can be a supplement or an addition to the 529 for college planning. We have things that illustrations and things that show you can use it for college, you can use it for down payment on a home, and then you can even use it in retirement, for income in retirement, and still pass away and leave some cash to the following generation. And I will tell you this, my father did have a couple whole life policies. They weren't massive, but the ones that he had, I would argue, are the best thing that he left to my mother. And I can say that because when you have all the expenses and you have the lifestyle change that occurs when you lose a spouse, you're never going to be able to fully comprehend what it means to have to either replace their income or replace the things that they used to do. And it's not like my dad was like mowing the lawn in his late 70s, but things had kind of gone downhill around the house. There were things that needed to be replaced, like a new porch, a new bathroom. And that's just how life goes. You don't necessarily stay on top of everything 1,000%. But when this person is now gone, there's a void. And I'm not saying money at all can replace the human being, but at least you're able to move on in a more, I don't know, you don't have to dig into the other assets. You don't have to reduce the other savings that you have when you have that death benefit. And so,
come here, play devil's advocate.
Sure.
So, I'm not talking about your mom, but with you, so like, it sounded like your struggle, like especially like when you moved to New York and like, had to get all those like side jobs and everything to survive.
Yeah.
Were like the grit portion of your story that like you leaned into and like really like made you who you are today. If you had like a couple $1 million safety net where you didn't do all those, like where do you think you would be as far as like being able to overcome adversity and hardships that obviously come like you're like,
Oh, you're saying if I had had the safety net then, you're saying I would not be the person I am today. That's true. However, now the question is, would I have had access to it? In other words, would my parents have given me access to it? Knowing my parents, they would not have. And what we might have, they would have controlled the purse strings, right? This isn't like again, it's not a trust fund that I get to just spend however I want when I turn 18. They own the policies. Like I own the policies on my son. I can use the money from the policies. They can't. They're my policies, right? So, but they're for their benefit, right? And so when the time comes, if I see that he's a fully baked human being, which I am now, what I would do with that money, what I would do with that money now would be very different than what I would have done with it when I was 20. If I had it when I was 20, it probably would have ruined me.
agree.
But the only thing I could say is, just as far as like opening the business in New York, like the only reason why the business survived as long as it did was because I had burned all the boats and I had no other way to get it to survive. Now, if I had already kind of had that experience, maybe even if I was even allowed to fail, what I would say is there's a right way and a wrong way to start a business. And the way that I started that business was the absolute wrong way. And that's why when we came to the pandemic, which was a major turbulence creator for many, many businesses, to say the least, the business was not set up to survive. Now, that's not saying that, if I had had money, I would have made it through, because I got loans. I got a couple 200 grand from the government to keep my business running. 50K, which was forgiven in PPP loans, but the other 150K I'm on the hook for. I have to pay that every month for the next 30 years. So it's not a question of infusement of capital all the time. However, getting things off the ground and on a more professional level, making things larger, being able to be your own bank. The other thing would have been a stipulation of like, you can borrow this money, but then you will have to pay it back. And you're going to have this is how you keep the money from depleting every year, by just taking more and taking more and taking more. There would be some sort of setup where, you can borrow this much now, and that's all you get until you pay it back. And then once you pay it back, if it's a decade later, then you've kind of up leveled, and now you can take out 4 times that or whatever. Again, this is a little more creative, but this is the conversation I would like people to be having. Is it's not black or white, and it's really what you want to do with it, right? And what I would like to be able to do is goodness gracious, all you want to do is have your kids grow up and be independent human beings. You want them to be able to thrive and be able to make decisions for themselves and not be caught up in a lot of the traps that life can throw their way. And none of that costs a dime, really. Again, but at the end of the day, I know where I lived, where I grew up, the guys that I grew up with, one of them worked at an auto body shop. One of them is a manager at a restaurant, and I mean kind of like a chain. Another one is an air conditioning repair guy, and I mean like works for a company, doesn't have his own business. Another guy became a severe alcoholic. Another guy became a drug addict, and then another guy worked at the same landscaping company that I got the job that I got him when we were in high school, and he worked in that same job all the way up until he killed himself. And so that's my circle of friends. And I don't know if every kid, I don't know what you have to have as far as a constitution to grow up around that and end up here and not end up where they are. And that's also the other thing that is maybe it will never be answered. But the reality is that, you know, because certain opportunities were afforded me at certain points in time, and I'll give you what I think is the formula that solved that. My parents sacrificed a lot, put me into private school in 7th grade. And so I was always the kind of the poor kid in private school, if you will. But I also made some great friends, and the friends that I have from that peer group, you know, one guy is an amazing pedal steel guitarist. Another guy was a early Bitcoin miner. So you can put that together. Another one is a pulmonologist. And so you got like blue collar guys on one side, highly successful, highly educated people on the other. And I would tell you 1,000 times over, if I can put my kids in a situation where they're hanging out with these guys and not these guys, they're going to do better in life, probably a marked percentage of the time.
Agreed.
Yeah. And so that's more, that's how we get into talking about whole life policies.
All right. So just give people like a quick, like 30-second pitch of like, what do you do? Like, what can you do for them? Like, and how can they reach out to you?
Absolutely. No, I appreciate that. And I mean, this has been great. You really allowed me to really dish it. So I appreciate it. I say the easiest way to connect with me is I'm working on developing an app. Of course I am. If you go to everestperformancelab.com, you'll be able to gain access to the app. You know, it makes you sign a couple things just because it does have some very sensitive proprietary information in it. So I think it's, you know, and it's evolving daily. But go to everestperformancelab.com. You're going to get some opportunity basically to communicate with me. You're also going to get, there's a strengths finder personality test in there, which I think is kind of cool. So you can find out what your strengths are and you can fortify those, build off your strengths rather than your weaknesses. And then you'll see some of the pillars of what I talk about in there: the alignment operating system, the physical vitality, psychological, social, spiritual connections, and legacy, protection, and generation. And so on some level, ultimately, we need all of those things. Am I the guy to provide all those to you? Potentially. At the very least, I'd like to think as myself as somebody who's can be a confidant and can be a sounding board and someone who sits on the same side of the table, as opposed to somebody that's trying to push some sort of agenda. So I appreciate it, man.
Yeah, appreciate you being on. What a great episode. Thank you so much. Adam, if there's anything I can do for you, feel free to reach out to me too.
Hey, man, nice.
Thank you.